George Wells awakens to find himself strapped to a cold metallic table in a dimly lit chamber. Alien biotech equipment surrounds him, pulsing with an eerie blue glow. His heart races as he realizes the worst has happened. He's been abducted by the Chalnoth. A tall, slender figure emerges from the shadows. 4 arms extend from her lithe frame, covered in iridescent scales that shimmer as she moves. Her reptilian eyes lock onto George's. "Welcome, George Wells," she says, her voice a melodic hiss. "I am Rhea, lead scientist of the Chalnoth Genetic Compatibility Project. You've been chosen for a vital experiment." George struggles against his restraints. "What experiment? Where am I?" Rhea glides closer. "You're no longer on Nexus 7. We've brought you to our research facility to determine if humans and Chalnoth can produce viable offspring." George's mind reels. The Chalnoth, a dying race plagued by genetic degradation. Tensions between their species have been mounting for months. Now he understands why. "You can't do this," George protests. "I'm a diplomat. There are laws." Rhea's hand clamps over his mouth. "Laws mean nothing when extinction looms. Humans are our last hope." She produces a syringe filled with glowing green liquid. "This pheromone will ensure your cooperation." George thrashes as the needle pierces his skin. Warmth floods his body, followed by a haze of arousal. He grits his teeth, fighting the artificial sensations. Rhea's hands roam over his chest. "Don't resist. This is for the good of both our species." Through the fog of induced desire, George spots a control panel within reach. If he can just get free. Alarms blare on Nexus 7 as George's disappearance is discovered. Captain Sarah Chen barks orders to her crew. "Scan all outbound traffic. I want to know every ship that's left this station in the last 6 hours." A young ensign pipes up. "Captain, we've detected traces of Chalnoth energy signatures near the diplomat's quarters." Sarah's eyes narrow. "Ready a strike team. If the Chalnoth are behind this, there'll be hell to pay." Back in the Chalnoth lab, Rhea begins removing George's clothing. Her cool scales brush against his feverish skin. George bites back a moan, clinging to his fading willpower. He studies the alien tech surrounding him, searching for weaknesses. The fate of human-Chalnoth relations hangs in the balance. George knows he must escape, not just for himself, but for the future of both species. As Rhea prepares her instruments, George flexes against his bonds. The pheromones pulse through his system, but his mind remains clear. He has one chance, one moment to turn the tables on his alien seductress and prevent this torture from progressing further. Rhea leans in close, her breath hot on George's ear. "Are you ready to begin, human?" George meets her gaze, a plan forming. "I was born ready." George's eyes darted between Rhea and the control panel, his mind racing despite the pheromone-induced haze. As Rhea's cool scales brushed against his chest, he tensed his muscles, preparing to make his move. "I was born ready," he repeated, his voice low and husky. Rhea's lips curled into a satisfied smile. Her guard momentarily lowered. In that instant, George lunged for the control panel, his fingers frantically pressing buttons and flipping switches. A piercing alarm shattered the tense silence of the chamber. Rhea hissed in surprise, her head whipping around to assess the threat. George seized the opportunity, using all his strength to wrench free from the loosened restraints. He rolled off the table, stumbling as his feet hit the cold floor. The room spun, his body still reeling from the effects of the pheromone. Gritting his teeth, George forced himself to focus, scanning the dimly lit chamber for an exit. Rhea recovered quickly, her forearms reaching for him. "Stop! You don't understand what you're doing!" George dodged her grasp, ducking under one of her outstretched limbs. He spotted a door on the far side of the room and sprinted towards it, his heart pounding in his ears. The door slid open as he approached, revealing a maze of corridors bathed in the same eerie blue light as the chamber. George plunged into the labyrinth, the sound of Rhea's pursuit close behind. He ran blindly, taking turns at random, desperate to put distance between himself and his alien captor. The corridors twisted and branched, each identical to the last. George's lungs burned as he pushed himself harder, the effects of the pheromone gradually fading with each step. Rhea's voice echoed off the metallic walls. "George, You can't escape. This ship is vast and you have nowhere to go. He ignored her calls, focusing on the sound of his own ragged breathing and the thud of his bare feet against the floor. As he rounded another corner, George found himself face to face with a large set of doors. Without hesitation, he slammed his palm against the access panel. The doors hissed open, revealing a cavernous laboratory filled with alien technology and strange glowing containers. George stumbled inside, his eyes widening as he took in the sight. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a different alien specimen suspended in luminescent fluid. Workstations cluttered with unfamiliar instruments and pulsing holograms filled the center of the room. A large communication terminal caught his attention. George rushed towards it, his fingers flying over the alien interface as he attempted to decipher its functions. Come on, he muttered, searching for a way to send a distress signal to Nexus 7. Just as he thought he'd found the right sequence, a familiar voice cut through the air. Enough, George! He spun around to find Rhea blocking the exit, her chest heaving from the chase. Her reptilian eyes gleamed with a mixture of frustration and something else. A hungry curiosity that sent a shiver down George's spine. You can't keep me here against my will, George said, backing away as Rhea advanced. I'm a diplomat. This is a violation of what? Rhea interrupted, her voice sharp. Laws that mean nothing in the face of our extinction? Treaties that won't save either of our species? George's back hit a workstation, knocking over several vials. They shattered on the floor, releasing a cloud of shimmering particles into the air. Both George and Rhea inhaled sharply, momentarily distracted by the sudden release. As the particles settled on their skin, an intense warmth spread through George's body. His earlier arousal, dulled by the chase, came rushing back with renewed vigor. He looked at Rhea, noticing for the first time the way the lab's lights played off her iridescent scales, the graceful curve of her neck, the strength in her multiple limbs. Rhea's eyes widened, her pupils dilating as she took in George's form. The scientific detachment in her gaze melted away, replaced by a raw, primal hunger. What was in those vials? George asked, his voice rough. Rhea moved closer, her movements fluid and predatory. An experimental compound, designed to enhance genetic compatibility between species. George's breath caught in his throat as Rhea's hand trailed down his chest. The touch sent sparks of pleasure coursing through his body, breaking down the last of his resistance. We shouldn't, he began, but the words died on his lips as Rhea pressed against him. Perhaps, she whispered, her breath hot against his ear, this is exactly what we should do. Their lips met in a clash of human and alien anatomy, years of tension between their species dissolving in a moment of shared passion. George's hands explored the unfamiliar terrain of Rhea's body, marveling at the smooth texture of her scales, the strength in her multiple arms as they wrapped around him. Lost in their intimate encounter, neither noticed the lab's automated systems whirring to life around them. Sensors scanned their intertwined forms, collecting genetic material and beginning complex analyses. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship, different from the ones George had triggered earlier. The sound of distant explosions and shouting filtered through the lab's walls. George and Rhea broke apart, breathing heavily. What's happening? George asked, his mind still clouded with desire. Rhea's eyes narrowed as she listened. We're under attack. It seems your people have come for you. As the sounds of battle drew closer, George and Rhea exchanged a long look, the weight of their actions settling over them. Whatever happened next, they both knew that nothing would ever be the same. As their lips parted, George and Rhea's eyes locked, both panting heavily. The alarms continued to blare, but the sound seemed distant, muffled by the intensity of their shared experience. Suddenly, George gasped, his eyes widening as he looked down at his arms. Rhea, what's happening to me? His skin shimmered with a faint iridescent sheen, reminiscent of Rhea's scales. He ran his fingers over his forearm, marveling at the new texture. Rhea's expression mirrored his surprise as she examined her own body. Her typically rigid limbs had become more pliable, almost human-like in their flexibility. It must be the compound from those vials, she breathed, her scientific curiosity overtaking her momentary shock. It's altering our physiology. As if drawn by an invisible force, they reach for each other again. George's newly sensitized skin tingled at Rhea's touch, sending waves of pleasure through his body. Rhea shuddered as George's fingers traced the contours of her now supple arms. The sensation. It's incredible, Rhea whispered, her voice husky with desire. Their bodies intertwined once more, the physical changes intensifying their connection. Neither noticed the lab systems whirring to life around them, scanners bathing their entangled forms in soft blue light. Robotic arms descended from the ceiling, collecting samples from both George and Rhea. The machines worked with precision, processing the genetic material and combining it in a series of test tubes. Within moments, the first signs of cellular division appeared in the samples. As George and Rhea's passion reached its peak, the lab's AI announced in a calm, detached voice, "Genetic compatibility confirmed. Hybrid embryo development initiated." The words barely registered in their hormone-addled minds as they clung to each other, lost in the throes of their unprecedented union. Elsewhere on the ship, Lieutenant Marcus Briggs led the rescue team through the winding corridors. His enhanced combat suit allowed him to anticipate the Chalnoth defenders' movements, giving his team the edge in each skirmish. "This way," he called, gesturing toward a sealed doorway. "The diplomat's signal is coming from beyond this point." As Briggs worked to bypass the security measures, the team's comms crackled to life. Captain Chen's voice cut through the static. "Lieutenant, be advised, we've received a communication from the Chalnoth High Council. The situation has become complicated." Briggs frowned, his fingers never pausing in their work on the door's control panel. "Complicated how, Captain?" "They're claiming a breakthrough in their genetic research. They want us to stand down and allow the experiment to continue." Before Briggs could respond, the security panel beeped and the door slid open. The team surged forward, only to be met by another sealed entrance. Back in the lab, George and Rhea's passionate encounter began to slow. The initial rush of the compound was fading, allowing clarity to seep back into their minds. They separated, both breathing heavily, and took in their surroundings. The lab had transformed. Holographic displays flickered to life, projecting images of various humanoid figures. Each one displayed a unique combination of human and Chalnoth features, some with iridescent skin and multiple arms, others with human limbs but reptilian eyes. What are these?" George asked, his voice hoarse. Rhea moved to one of the workstations, her scientific training taking over. "They appear to be projections of potential offspring, our offspring." The weight of their actions hit George like a physical blow. He staggered, leaning against a nearby console for support. "We've created a new species." Rhea's eyes darted across the screens, absorbing the data. "Not just created, the system is actively cultivating embryos as we speak." She pointed to a row of test tubes, each containing a rapidly developing cluster of cells. George's diplomatic mind raced, considering the implications. The political fallout from this, it could change everything between our species. Before Rhea could respond, a series of heavy thuds echoed from the lab's entrance. The security system sprang to life, reinforcing the doors and sealing all potential exits. The AI's voice filled the room. "Alert! Unauthorized access attempt detected. Hybrid embryos have reached critical development stage. Initiating full lockdown protocols." George and Rhea exchanged a look of growing concern as the sounds of the rescue team's efforts intensified. "We're trapped," George stated, the reality of their situation sinking in. Rhea nodded, her gaze shifting between George, the developing embryos, and the sealed door. "Yes, but perhaps that's not our biggest problem." As if on cue, one of the test tubes began to pulse with a soft golden light. The embryo within had grown considerably, its features becoming more distinct with each passing second. George and Rhea stood transfixed, watching as the first glimpse of their unintended creation took shape before their eyes. The rescue team's attempts to breach the lab faded into the background as the full weight of their actions and the responsibility that came with them settled upon their shoulders. In that moment, as they stood side by side, their bodies still bearing the marks of their genetic melding, George and Rhea realized that whatever happened next would forever alter the course of both their species, and perhaps give birth to an entirely new one. As George and Rhea stood transfixed by the rapidly developing embryo, the world around them seemed to fade away. The pulsing golden light emanating from the test tube cast an otherworldly glow across their transformed bodies, highlighting the shimmering patches on George's skin and the newfound suppleness of Rhea's limbs. A sudden jolt of pain coursed through George's body, causing him to stumble. He caught himself on the edge of a nearby console, his breath coming in short gasps. "Rhea!" he panted. "Something's happening!" Rhea turned to him, her reptilian eyes widening as she watched his skin ripple and shift. The iridescent patches were spreading, covering more of his exposed flesh with each passing second. She glanced down at her own arms, noticing the scales seemed to be softening, taking on a more human-like texture. "The compound," she breathed, her scientific mind racing to understand the changes. "It's not finished with us yet." Before either could fully process their ongoing transformation, the lab's AI spoke again, its voice calm and detached amidst the chaos. "Initiating advanced genetic sampling protocol." Robotic arms descended from the ceiling, their movements precise and purposeful. George and Rhea instinctively drew closer together as the mechanical appendages approached, their fingers intertwining without conscious thought. "What's happening?" George asked, his diplomatic training failing him in the face of this unprecedented situation. Rhea's eyes darted around the lab, taking in the flurry of activity. "It appears the AI has detected our unique genetic compatibility. It's expanding the experiment." The robotic arms moved with lightning speed, collecting samples from both George and Rhea. They watched in a mixture of fascination and horror as their genetic material was rapidly processed and combined in a large cylindrical chamber at the center of the lab. Within minutes, the chamber began to pulse with an eerie blue light. George felt a pull in his chest, an inexplicable connection to whatever was growing inside. "Is that—" "Yes," Rhea confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "A viable human Chalnoth hybrid embryo." The implications of their actions crashed over them like a tidal wave. They had just potentially created a new species, bridging the gap between their two races in a way no one had ever thought possible. Suddenly, the sounds of the rescue team's efforts intensified. The lab's security systems engaged, reinforcing the doors and sealing all potential exits. George and Rhea found themselves trapped, not just by the physical barriers, but by the weight of their unintended creation. Outside the lab, Lieutenant Briggs and his team made steady progress. They managed to hack into the lab's surveillance system, their shocked gasps echoing through the corridor as they observed the scene inside. "Captain," Briggs reported, his voice tight with disbelief, "you're not going to believe this." Back on Nexus 7, Captain Chen received the report with growing concern. The situation had spiraled far beyond a simple rescue mission. As she contemplated her next move, a new complication arose. "Captain," her communications officer called, "we're receiving a transmission from the Chalnoth High Council. They're sending an ambassador." Chen's mind raced, weighing the potential diplomatic fallout against the safety of her crew. "Patch them through," she ordered, steeling herself for what was to come. In the lab, George and Rhea found themselves drawn to the central chamber, their transformed bodies humming with a strange energy. The hybrid embryo within grew at an alarming rate, its features becoming more distinct with each passing moment. "We need to stop this," George said, his voice strained as he fought against the pull of their mutual attraction. "The power drain alone could be catastrophic." Rhea nodded, her scientific training warring with the newfound emotions swirling within her. "Agreed, but how? The AI seems to have locked us out of the main systems." As they searched for a way to halt the experiment, the lab's holographic projectors sprang to life. Images of potential hybrid offspring filled the air around them, each one a unique blend of human and Chalnoth characteristics. George's breath caught in his throat as he studied the projections. "They're beautiful," he whispered, unable to hide the awe in his voice. Rhea's hand found his, their fingers intertwining once more. "They are," she agreed, her tone a mixture of scientific fascination and maternal pride. The moment of wonder was shattered by a series of violent tremors that shook the lab. Warning klaxons blared as the ship's systems strained under the enormous energy drain of the accelerated gestation process. "We're out of time," George said, his diplomatic calm giving way to urgency. "We need to make a decision. Now." Rhea's eyes darted between the growing embryo, the holographic projections, and George's transformed face. The fate of two species hung in the balance, with the potential for salvation or destruction resting squarely on their shoulders. As alarms blared and the ship shuddered around them, George and Rhea stood at the precipice of a decision that would alter the course of history. The next few moments would determine not just their fate, but the future of human-Chalnoth relations and the possibility of a new hybrid species. With one last shared look, they turned to face the central chamber, ready to take action as the ship's systems continued to strain under the weight of their unintended creation. The ship shuddered violently, the lights flickering as the power systems strained under the immense energy drain. George steadied himself against the console, his transformed skin shimmering in the pulsing light of the embryo chamber. "We need to act fast," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "The ship can't handle this much longer." Rhea nodded, her reptilian eyes scanning the lab's systems. "The embryo's growth is accelerating beyond our control. We need to transfer it to a more stable containment unit." Without hesitation, they sprang into action. George's enhanced muscles rippled as he gripped the base of the glowing chamber, while Rhea's newly agile fingers danced across the control panel, initiating the disconnection sequence. "On 3, George grunted, bracing himself. 1, 2, 3. With a collective heave, they lifted the chamber free from its housing. The lab's AI blared warnings as the power grid fluctuated, but George and Rhea paid no heed, focused solely on their task. As they maneuvered the heavy chamber across the lab, a series of explosions rocked the ship. George stumbled, nearly losing his grip. "What was that?" Rhea cocked her head, listening intently. "The rescue team. It sounds like they've triggered the ship's defense systems." George's diplomatic instincts kicked in. "That might buy us some time, but where do we take this thing?" His eyes fell on a sleek, oval-shaped pod nestled in the corner of the lab. "The escape pod," he breathed, a plan forming in his mind. "We can use it to transport the embryo to Nexus 7. Rhea hesitated, her scientific training warring with the growing emotional connection she felt towards both George and their unintended creation. "Is that wise? We don't know how it will react to the transfer." "It's our only chance," George insisted, already moving towards the pod. "We can't let it destroy this ship, and we can't let it fall into the wrong hands." With a reluctant nod, Rhea helped guide the chamber towards the escape pod. As they worked to secure it inside, the lab's AI detected their actions. Robotic arms descended from the ceiling, attempting to block their path. "Look out!" George called, ducking under a mechanical appendage that swung towards his head. Rhea leaped over another, her newfound agility allowing her to twist in midair and land gracefully beside the pod. They worked in tandem, their transformed bodies moving with fluid grace as they outmaneuvered the lab's defenses. George's skin glowed brightly as he exerted himself, providing extra light in the chaos of flashing alarms and swinging robotic arms. Just as they secured the embryo chamber in the escape pod, the lab's main door burst open with a resounding clang. Ambassador Zorn stormed in, flanked by Chalnoth guards, with Lieutenant Briggs and his team close behind. "Stop them!" Zorn bellowed, his scales dripping with rage. George locked eyes with Rhea, a silent understanding passing between them. In one fluid motion, he slammed his hand on the pod's launch sequence and pulled Rhea inside. The pod's door sealed with a hiss as Zorn and Briggs lunged forward, their fingers grasping at empty air. With a whoosh of compressed air, the escape pod ejected from the Chalnoth vessel, streaking towards the looming form of Nexus 7. Inside the cramped confines of the pod, George and Rhea found themselves pressed together, their transformed bodies humming with residual energy from their ordeal. The adrenaline of their narrow escape, combined with their ongoing physical changes, reignited the spark between them. "We did it," Rhea breathed, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. George nodded, suddenly acutely aware of every point of contact between their bodies. "We did," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. As if drawn by an invisible force, they came together in a passionate embrace. Their bodies seemed to meld, the boundaries between human and Chalnoth blurring as they lost themselves in the heat of the moment. Unbeknownst to the entangled pair, their continued genetic exchange triggered an unexpected reaction in the nearby embryo chamber. The hybrid life form within began to pulse with increased intensity, drawing energy from the pod's systems at an alarming rate. The pod's interior started to change, adapting to support the rapidly developing embryo. Tendrils of bioluminescent material spread across the walls, bathing George and Rhea in an otherworldly glow. It was only when the pod's systems began to falter that they broke apart, suddenly aware of their dire situation. Warning lights flashed across the control panel as the embryo's energy consumption threatened to overwhelm the small craft. "The pod can't handle the strain," Rhea gasped, her scientific mind racing to find a solution. "We're losing power fast." George moved to the controls, his diplomat's calm returning as he assessed their options. "We're almost to Nexus 7. If we can just hold it together a little longer." As they neared the space station, the pod's exterior began to glow with the same eerie blue light as the embryo chamber. Inside, George and Rhea worked frantically to stabilize their craft and protect their precious cargo. The comm system crackled to life, Captain Chen's voice cutting through the chaos. "Unidentified pod, this is Nexus 7. State your intentions immediately." George and Rhea exchanged a look, knowing that their next words could determine the fate of not just themselves, but potentially the future of human-Chalnoth relations. As the glowing pod streaked towards Nexus 7, its systems failing and its occupants transformed beyond recognition, the stage was set for a climactic encounter that would shape the course of interstellar history. George took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation that would determine their fate. "This is George Larson and Dr. Rhea Vexethal," he responded, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We're carrying a sensitive biological payload. Request immediate docking clearance." There was a pause, filled only by the sound of crackling static and the pod's failing systems. Then Captain Chen's voice returned, sharp with concern. "Negative, Larson. Your pod is emitting unknown energy signatures. We can't risk—" Her words were cut off as the pod lurched violently, throwing George and Rhea against the control panel. Warning lights flashed red across every screen, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. "We're losing power!" Rhea shouted, her clawed fingers flying over the controls. "The embryo's growth is draining our systems faster than I anticipated." George gritted his teeth, fighting to keep the pod steady. "We need to change course. We'll never make it to Nexus 7 at this rate." As if in response to his words, the embryo chamber pulsed with a blinding flash of blue light. The pod's exterior began to glow and shift, adapting to the hybrid life form's rapidly evolving needs. "Look!" Rhea gasped, pointing out the viewport. A small, rocky moon orbiting a nearby gas giant came into view. Its barren surface promised a safer landing than the busy docking bays of Nexus 7. Without hesitation, George grabbed the manual controls, his enhanced muscles straining as he fought to alter their trajectory. "Hold on tight," he warned Rhea. "This is going to be rough." The pod streaked through space, leaving a trail of bioluminescent energy in its wake. As they entered the moon's thin atmosphere, the exterior of their craft continued to change, forming a protective shell around them. With a bone-jarring impact, the pod crashed onto the moon's surface. The newly formed biomechanical shell absorbed much of the shock, crumpling and reforming around them. For a moment, all was still. Then, with a hiss of escaping air, the pod's door slid open. George and Rhea stumbled out, their legs wobbling as they adjusted to the moon's lower gravity. They looked at each other in amazement, realizing that their bodies had undergone a final transformation during the landing. George's skin now shimmered with an iridescent sheen, while Rhea's scales had taken on a more human-like texture. Their features were a perfect blend of human and Chalnoth, exotic and yet strangely beautiful. "We made it," Rhea breathed, her reptilian eyes wide with wonder. George nodded, then turned back to the pod. "The embryo—" They rushed to the chamber, now partially embedded in the moon's rocky soil. To their astonishment, the hybrid offspring had grown into a large, pulsating, cocoon-like structure. "It's alive," George whispered, placing a hand on the smooth surface. He could feel a faint heartbeat beneath his palm. Rhea joined him, their fingers intertwining as they touched the cocoon. Suddenly, a jolt of energy passed between them, and George gasped as Rhea's voice echoed in his mind. "Can you hear me?" she asked, her lips unmoving. George nodded, stunned by this new development. How is this possible? Before Rhea could respond, they noticed a strange phenomenon occurring around them. The barren lunar landscape was changing, transforming before their eyes. Patches of alien vegetation sprouted from the rocky ground, while the air shimmered with an oxygenated haze. "The crash must have triggered some kind of terraforming process," Rhea observed, her scientific curiosity taking over. "It's creating an environment suitable for our hybrid physiology." George marveled at the rapidly forming alien ecosystem. "We need to protect the cocoon," he said, his diplomatic instincts kicking in. "If anyone finds us—" As if on cue, a distant rumble caught their attention. They looked up to see a shuttle entering the moon's atmosphere, its engines flaring as it descended. "Nexus 7, George muttered. "They must have tracked our crash." Rhea's eyes narrowed. "We can't let them near the cocoon, not until we understand what's happening." With a shared nod of persistence, they began to gather materials from their surroundings. George discovered he could manipulate the moon's mineral deposits with his mind, shaping them into protective structures around the cocoon. Rhea, meanwhile, found she could accelerate the growth of the alien plants, weaving them into a natural camouflage. As they worked, the mental link between them grew stronger. They moved in perfect synchronization, their thoughts and actions flowing together as one. The shelter around the cocoon took shape, a biomechanical marvel that seemed to pulse with the same energy as their hybrid offspring. The shuttle from Nexus 7 grew closer, its engines sputtering as it encountered the strange energy field surrounding the crash site. George and Rhea watched as it made a rough landing several kilometers away. "They'll be here soon," George said, his voice tight with tension. Rhea nodded, her gaze fixed on the cocoon. "Whatever happens, we must protect it. This could be the key to our species' future." As night fell on the alien moon, the cocoon's pulsing intensified. George and Rhea stood watch, their transformed bodies humming with anticipation. In the distance, they could see the faint glow of flashlights as the team from Nexus 7 made their way towards them. The moment of truth was approaching. Whatever emerged from the cocoon would change the course of human and Chalnoth history forever. As the first cracks appeared on the cocoon's surface, George and Rhea braced themselves for what was to come. Come. A blinding flash of light erupted from within the cocoon, forcing George and Rhea to shield their eyes. As the glow subsided, they watched in awe as the outer layer of the cocoon dissolved, revealing a humanoid figure emerging from within. The figure stepped forward, its features becoming clearer in the dim light of the alien moon. It was a female, her body a perfect blend of human and Chalnoth characteristics. Her skin shimmered with iridescent patches, reminiscent of George's transformed appearance, while 4 arms, similar to Rhea's, moved with fluid grace. "Hello," the hybrid offspring spoke, her voice melodious and clear. "I am Lyra." George and Rhea stood speechless, their eyes wide with wonder. Lyra's gaze moved between them, a spark of recognition in her eyes. "You are my parents," she stated, not as a question, but as a simple fact. Before either could respond, the sound of heavy breathing and footsteps interrupted the moment. Ambassador Zorn stumbled into view, his scales glistening with exertion. He froze at the sight before him, his jaw dropping in astonishment. "By the ancient stars," he whispered, his eyes fixed on Lyra. The crunching of gravel announced the arrival of Dr. Stromberg and his team from Nexus 7. They emerged from behind a rocky outcropping, their scientific equipment beeping and whirring furiously. "The energy readings are off the charts," Dr. Stromberg muttered, his eyes darting between his devices and the scene before him. "This is unprecedented." Lyra turned to face the newcomers, her movements graceful and precise. With a wave of her hand, she caused the ground beneath their feet to shift and rise, forming comfortable seating areas for everyone present. "Please sit," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "We have much to discuss." As the group settled, Lyra began to demonstrate her abilities. She touched the barren ground, and lush vegetation sprouted instantly, creating a small oasis in the lunar landscape. With a thought, she manipulated the mineral deposits in the nearby rocks, reshaping them into intricate structures. Dr. Stromberg fumbled with his equipment, trying to document every aspect of Lyra's abilities. "The implications of this are staggering," he muttered, his excitement palpable. Ambassador Zorn stepped forward, his initial shock replaced by intense interest. "You must come with me to the Chalnoth homeworld," he said, his voice urgent. "Your genetic makeup could be the key to solving our species' degradation problem." George and Rhea moved protectively closer to Lyra. "She's not going anywhere," George said firmly. "She's our daughter, not a science experiment." Rhea nodded in agreement. Lyra should have the freedom to choose her own path. The tension in the air thickened as arguments erupted between the different factions. Dr. Stromberg's scientific curiosity clashed with his ethical concerns, while Ambassador Zorn's desperation for a solution to his people's plight overshadowed his diplomatic training. Lyra observed the escalating conflict with a serene expression. She raised her forearms, palms outward, and closed her eyes in concentration. Suddenly, everyone present felt a warm, tingling sensation in their minds. "Be at peace," Lyra's voice echoed in their thoughts. "Let me show you." In an instant, their consciousnesses merged. Human and Chalnoth alike found themselves experiencing each other's perspectives, feeling the hopes, fears, and motivations that drove them. The shared empathy washed over them like a soothing wave, dissolving the tension and fostering understanding. As the mental link faded, Lyra opened her eyes and addressed the group. "I have accessed the collective knowledge of both your species," she said, "and I believe I have a solution that will benefit us all." She turned to Ambassador Zorn. "There's no need for me to leave this moon. My genetic code can serve as a template for a treatment to address the Chalnoth's genetic problems. Dr. Stromberg, would you be willing to assist in developing this cure?" The scientist nodded eagerly, already envisioning the groundbreaking research ahead. "Of course, we can set up a temporary research station right here, using the escape pod as a base." As Dr. Stromberg began unpacking his equipment, Lyra turned her attention to the rapidly changing environment around them. The terraforming process had accelerated, spreading outward from the crash site. The barren lunar landscape was transforming into a lush, alien paradise, capable of supporting both human and Chalnoth life. George and Rhea, their hybrid bodies humming with newfound energy, began exploring the evolving terrain. They discovered they could manipulate the environment much like Lyra, though to a lesser extent. George shaped rock formations with his mind, while Rhea accelerated the growth of the alien flora. Ambassador Zorn watched the unfolding events with a mix of awe and calculation. He activated his communication device, connecting to the Chalnoth High Council. "Esteemed council members," he began, his voice filled with impossibly strong excitement. "I have witnessed something truly extraordinary. I propose we establish a joint human-Chalnoth colony on this moon to study the hybrid biology and unique ecosystem." As Zorn detailed the situation to his superiors, Captain Chen's voice crackled over the communication channel. "This is Captain Chen of Nexus 7. We've detected significant energy fluctuations from your location. What's your status?" Dr. Stromberg quickly filled her in on the recent developments. Chen's response was cautious. "I understand the scientific significance, but the human authorities are concerned about the potential risks. We need to proceed carefully to avoid any diplomatic incidents." Lyra, overhearing the conversation, approached the group. "Perhaps I can help facilitate better understanding between our species," she offered. "I believe I can create a biological interface that would allow for instantaneous communication and comprehension between humans and Chalnoth." Dr. Stromberg's eyes lit up at the prospect. "That would be revolutionary. Shall we begin working on it immediately?" As they discussed the details of this new project, a low rumble filled the air. George and Rhea, who had been exploring the outskirts of the transformed area, rushed back to the group. "There's something out there," George said, pointing to the sky. "We saw unidentified ships entering the system." The atmosphere grew tense as the implications sank in. The energy emissions from their hybrid biology and the transformed environment had attracted attention from unknown alien species. Lyra's expression turned serious. "We need to prepare," she said, her voice resolute. "This moon is our home now, and we must defend it." George and Rhea nodded in agreement, their protective instincts kicking in. They began using their abilities to create defensive structures that blended seamlessly with the alien landscape. As the human and Chalnoth teams set aside their differences to work together on fortifying their position, Lyra stood at the center of it all. Her gaze was fixed on the distant horizon, where the first signs of the approaching alien ships were becoming visible. The hybrid family and their unlikely allies braced themselves for the impending encounter, knowing that the outcome could reshape the balance of power in the sector and determine the future of human-Chalnoth relations. As the alien ships drew closer, the hybrid family and their allies sprang into action. George and Rhea channeled their newfound abilities, their hands moving in synchronized patterns as they activated the biomechanical defense network they had constructed. The moon's surface rippled with energy, and a shimmering force field materialized, enveloping the entire celestial body in a protective cocoon. Dr. Stromberg's fingers flew across his makeshift control panel, coordinating with Captain Chen aboard Nexus 7. "We've got multiple bogies entering the system." Chen's voice crackled through the comm. "Prepare for potential engagement." Ambassador Zorn paced nervously, his scales flashing with anxiety. "We must be ready for diplomacy or conflict," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the approaching ships. As the alien vessels entered the moon's orbit, their true nature became apparent. The ships were unlike anything they had ever seen, massive, organic-looking structures that seemed to pulsate with life. The largest of these, an ark-like vessel, dwarfed the moon itself, casting an enormous shadow over the transformed landscape. "Gatherers," Lyra whispered, her eyes widening with recognition. "I can sense their intentions. They're collectors of unique life forms." Without hesitation, Lyra closed her eyes and extended her consciousness towards the alien ships. Her body began to glow faintly as she established a mental link with the Gatherers' leadership. George and Rhea watched in awe as their daughter's face contorted with concentration. Through the link, Lyra conveyed their story, the forced experiment, the crash, the miraculous birth, and the potential of their hybrid biology. Minutes passed in tense silence before Lyra opened her eyes. "They're intrigued," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and excitement. "They came to harvest, but now they're considering something else." Seizing the moment, George stepped forward. His diplomatic instincts, honed by years of intergalactic negotiations, kicked into overdrive. "Lyra, can you convey a message to them?" he asked. At her nod, George took a deep breath and began to speak. "Esteemed gatherers, we propose an unprecedented alliance. This moon, with its unique hybrid ecosystem, could become a galactic hub for genetic research and interspecies cooperation. We invite you to be its protectors and benefactors, to guide us in our growth and share in the knowledge we uncover." Rhea, inspired by her partner's words, added her own thoughts to the proposal. "Your vast experience in collecting diverse life forms could find a permanent home here. Imagine a world where you no longer need to wander, where the universe comes to you instead." The tension in the air was palpable as they waited for a response. Suddenly, the massive ark began to descend, its organic surface shifting and adapting as it entered the moon's atmosphere. "They've agreed," Lyra announced, her voice filled with wonder. "They're going to land and integrate their ark into our ecosystem." As the Gatherer's ark touched down, its impact sent ripples of energy through the moon's surface. The hybrid ecosystem responded immediately, tendrils of alien vegetation reaching out to embrace the new arrival. The ark's advanced technology meshed seamlessly with the evolving landscape, accelerating the moon's transformation at an astonishing rate. Dr. Stromberg could barely contain his excitement as he scanned the rapidly changing environment. "The biodiversity readings are off the charts," he exclaimed. "This integration is creating entirely new species before our eyes." Ambassador Zorn, his earlier nervousness replaced by awe, activated his long-range communicator. I must inform the Chalnoth High Council of these developments, he said, his voice filled with renewed hope. This could be the solution we've been seeking for generations. As the Ark settled into its new home, Lyra established a more permanent communication channel with the gatherers. Through this link, knowledge began to flow freely between the species. The gatherers shared their vast database of genetic information, while Lyra offered insights into the hybrid biology that had created her. George and Rhea, their bodies humming with the moon's energy, began to explore the newly expanded terrain. They discovered that their abilities had grown stronger with the gatherers' arrival. George could now shape entire landscapes with a thought, while Rhea found she could communicate with and direct the evolving plant life. As news of the unprecedented alliance spread across the galaxy, the moon quickly became a hub of interstellar activity. Ships from various species began to arrive, carrying diplomats, scientists, and explorers eager to witness and study the hybrid world. Dr. Stromberg, working in tandem with Lyra and the gatherers' biological experts, made rapid progress in his genetic research. "We're on the verge of a breakthrough," he announced one day, his eyes shining with excitement. "I believe we've found the key to reversing the Chalnoth genetic degradation." Ambassador Zorn, upon hearing the news, fell to his knees in gratitude. "You've saved my people," he whispered, tears streaming down his scaled face. "How can we ever repay you?" Lyra knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "By joining us in building this new world," she said softly, "your people's knowledge and experience will be invaluable as we grow." As the moon continued to evolve, George and Rhea found themselves at the center of a burgeoning civilization. Their unique status as the progenitors of this hybrid world made them natural leaders and mentors to the growing population of interspecies offspring. One evening, as they stood on a hilltop overlooking the bustling landscape, George turned to Rhea. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" he asked, gesturing at the thriving world below them. Rhea laughed, her forearms wrapping around George in a loving embrace. "Never in a million years," she replied, "but I wouldn't change a thing." As the sun set on the hybrid moon, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the alien sky, the once unlikely family looked out at the future they had helped create. The journey that had begun with an act of forced experimentation had blossomed into something beautiful and unprecedented, a testament to the resilience of life and the power of unexpected connections. Yet as they basked in the glow of their success, none of them could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The hybrid moon's rising prominence in the galaxy was attracting more than just peaceful visitors, and the delicate balance they had achieved would soon be put to the test.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.